The Galactic Council attacked at dawn. Humanity was already waiting. Part 1, they thought we were asleep. The alert did not build slowly. It did not give me time to breathe, to blink, or to set down my coffee. 1 second the board was green. The next, it was screaming red across every panel on my station, and the sound of 47 proximity alarms going off at the same time was something I will never forget for the rest of my life. My name is Yale Doran. I'm a commander in the Earth Defense Grid, currently assigned to Luna Station, which sits in permanent orbit 238,000 miles above the planet I was born on. I have held this post for 6 years. I have run 312 drills. I have filed 2,000 reports. I have stared at sensor boards through cold, quiet nights and watched nothing happen, over and over again, until some people in my unit started calling those nights boring. I never called them boring. I called them practice. At 4:23 Sol Standard Time, 47 Galactic Council warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of our solar system, and every single one of them was exactly where our intelligence models had predicted they would be. I stood up from my chair and I felt something strange move through me. It was not fear. It had edges that were too sharp and too calm to be fear. It was the feeling of watching something you have planned for, prepared for, and rehearsed for 3 full years finally arrive at your doorstep. There is almost a kind of relief in it. The waiting was over. Commander Doran, my systems officer, a young man named Owen Carlyle, turned from his console with wide eyes. He was 24 years old and this was his first real alert. His voice held a shake in it that he was doing his best to control. I am reading 47 signatures, council configuration, full battle spread. I see them, Owen. I kept my voice level. I had learned a long time ago that a calm voice in a crisis is one of the most powerful tools a leader has. Panic spreads like heat, so does steadiness. Time to effective weapons range. At current approach velocity, approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I pulled up the tactical overlay and stared at the spread of those 47 ships fanning out across the edge of our system. They had come in a wide arc, trying to split our attention, trying to make us choose which direction to defend. It was a solid strategy. Against most species in this galaxy, it would have worked perfectly. We had studied the Council's battle doctrine for 2 years, before we ever started building our response to it. 3 years ago, a Council diplomatic courier vessel made a navigational error and drifted within range of a listening post we had placed in the outer belt. The crew of that vessel was not aware of the post. The post recorded 11 hours of internal Council communications before the courier corrected its course and jumped away. Those 11 hours changed everything. Our intelligence team, led by a quiet and terrifyingly brilliant analyst named Grace Hollies, spent 4 months breaking the Council's encryption layer. The Council used a cipher system they had been using for over 200 years, unchanged, because no species they had ever encountered had managed to crack it. Grace cracked it in 17 weeks. When she walked into the briefing room and placed her translated transcript on the table, every officer in that room went completely silent. The Council had been watching us for 9 years. They had decided, in a closed session of the High Chamber, that humanity's expansion rate was a threat to their authority. We had been making friends with border species they considered untouchable. We had been building infrastructure in regions they considered their private territory. We had been refusing, politely but firmly, every offer of what they called protectorate status, which was simply a softer word for control. The attack had been approved 18 months before Grace broke that cipher. They had a date. They had a formation plan. They had a name for the operation, which translated roughly to First Light, because they intended to strike at dawn and be finished before humanity had time to understand what was happening to it. They chose dawn because, in every culture they had ever studied and absorbed, dawn was the hour when defenses were lowest and sleep was deepest. They believed we would be tired. They believed we would be slow. They believed, as so many species had believed before making their first and only major mistake, that humanity was still in the process of becoming something worth taking seriously. I pulled up the channel to our fleet and pressed the comm key. All wings, this is Commander Doran at Luna Station. Confirm tracking on 47 Council signatures, bearing as predicted. All positions are live. Execute Operation Sunrise. The response came back in a wave of clipped, steady voices from every station, every ship, every outpost from here to the outer belt. Not a single voice shook. Not a single officer hesitated. They had all been at their station since 400. Battle rations had been distributed. Systems had been running final checks for 23 minutes before the Council ships even appeared on our sensors. We had been waiting. Owen looked at me from across the room. The shake in his voice was gone now. He had heard the fleet respond, and he understood something in that moment that took most soldiers years to learn. He understood that the most frightening thing you can do to an enemy is not to surprise them with your firepower. It is to let them discover, in the moment they believe they have you, that you already knew they were coming. "Commander," he said, and this time his voice was steady. "The Council just broadcast their declaration of war." I checked the timestamp on the transmission. 600 Sol Standard Time, right on schedule. They had written a formal declaration, given it a ceremony, and sent it to us as a message of dominance. It was timestamped for dawn. I looked at my tactical board, where 47 enemy ships were sailing toward a solar system that had been converted, over the past 3 years, into the most carefully prepared defensive network humanity had ever built. I looked at the silent drifter fields seeded through the approach corridors. I looked at the fleet formations already moving into their assigned positions. I looked at the Deep Strike Reserve Squadron sitting dark and cold and perfectly patient in the shadow of Jupiter, waiting for their moment. Then I looked at that declaration of war, timestamped for 600. We had been at battle stations for 1 hour and 37 minutes before they sent it. "Owen," I said. "Yes, Commander." "Note in the log that at 4:23 we became aware of the incoming fleet, and all defensive protocols were already in effect. Note also that their declaration arrived 83 minutes after our preparations were complete." I paused. "I want that timestamp in the permanent record." Owen typed quickly, "Done." I turned back to my board and watched the 47 red markers moving in what they believed was a surprise formation across the edge of our sky. "They came to end us at dawn," I said quietly, mostly to myself. They had no idea that we had been standing here, in the dark, awake, armed, and completely ready, long before the sun came up. Part 2, the first lesson, we count everything. My name is Rohan Mehta. I am a staff sergeant in the 3rd Orbital Infantry Division, and right now I am sitting in the belly of a dropship that smells like recycled air, boot polish, and the particular kind of nervous sweat that healthy, well-trained soldiers produce when they are approximately 40 minutes away from the worst day of their lives. The ship is called the Carver. She is not pretty. She has been patched in 11 places that I can count from where I am sitting, and I suspect there are more patches I cannot see. She rattles in a way that sounds concerning until you have ridden her enough times to know that she always sounds like this, that the rattle is simply her personality, and that she has delivered her cargo safely every single time. Above us, the battle is beginning. I know this because the ship just shuddered, and not from her own engines. Something large detonated in the near distance, and the vibration traveled through the hull and up through the floor and into the soles of my boots like a message. "Rohan," it said. "It has started." Sitting to my left is a soldier I will call Tal, which is not his full name, but it is what everyone calls him. Tal is not human. He is Velthari, a species from a small system 2 sectors from ours that the Galactic Council has been slowly squeezing economically for about 60 years. He defected to our side 8 months ago. Along with a group of 41 other Velthari, who had finally decided that slow economic strangulation was worse than the risk of open resistance. They went through training alongside our own recruits, and every single one of them graduated. Tal is quiet by nature. His species communicates a great deal through skin color shifts that humans cannot produce, so verbal conversation is something he has always treated as a secondary tool. But he speaks our language well, and right now, he is looking at the floor of the dropship with an expression I have come to recognize as the Velthari version of deep concentration. "You want to know something?" I said to him. He looked up. His skin flickered briefly toward the pale gray. That means he is listening. Yes. This fight was decided before a single weapon fired. He studied me for a moment. Outside, another distant shudder moved through the hull. Explain that. I thought about how to say it simply, because Tal is smart but our frame of reference is completely different, and I have learned that the best explanations are the ones that start from a place the other person already understands. Your people, I said. When the council started restricting your trade routes, what did your government do? They petitioned the High Chamber, submitted formal complaints through the diplomatic registry, requested review sessions. And the council responded by promising reviews that took 3 years and resulted in partial restorations that disappeared within 6 months. Right. Tal's skin shifted to a deeper gray. Correct. While that was happening, were your people counting things, cataloging exactly how much trade volume was being lost, tracking which officials were signing which restrictions, building a precise record of every single thing being taken from you? He was quiet for a moment. Not in any organized way. We trusted that the process would correct itself. You don't do that, I said. Humans count everything. We have been counting everything for 10,000 years, and the reason we started was because we kept losing. We lost wars, we lost food, we lost land, we lost people. And every single time we lost, there was always a point somewhere in that loss where a few humans sat down in the wreckage and started writing things down. What went wrong? How it went wrong? What we should have done differently? What the enemy did that we did not expect? How many of our people it cost us? We turned every defeat into a document, and then we used those documents to build better plans. Above us, the battle was escalating. I could hear the ship's external sensors picking up energy signatures now, dozens of them, a spreading web of activity across the orbital approaches to our system. That is why you were ready, Tal said. It was not a question. That is part of why. The intelligence work, the cipher breaking, the advanced preparation, all of that came from the same instinct. We saw a threat, we took it seriously, we started counting and planning and building. I leaned forward slightly. But there is something else, something specific that is happening right now up there that I want you to understand. He straightened slightly, which for Velthari is a gesture of focused attention. 3 months ago, our unmanned logistics team seeded the primary approach corridors to this system with what we call silent drifters. They are mines, but not like any mines the Council has ever seen. Standard mines have an electromagnetic profile. They put out a small but detectable signal. Council sensors are calibrated to find them. Our drifters have zero electromagnetic output, completely passive. No signal, no heat bloom, no power draw. They sit in space like rocks. Tal processed this. How do they detonate? Proximity trigger, mechanical. No electronics involved. When a ship comes close enough, a physical mechanism trips, and that is the end of that ship. And the Council's sensors cannot detect them. Their sensors are looking for the wrong things. They are looking for electronic signatures, power cells, anything with a current running through it. Our drifters have no current. They are, to every scanner the Council possesses, completely invisible. A new shudder moved through the carver, sharper this time, close enough that Tal grabbed the restraint bar on his seat. I did not grab mine. I had been on enough dropships to know the difference between a concerning shudder and a structural one. How many drifters did you place? Tal asked. I smiled at him. That is the most important part of the lesson. Are you ready? He waited. We did not know exactly which approach corridor the Council would use. We had strong intelligence suggesting 3 probable corridors, with one being the most likely. A less thorough military would have mined the most likely corridor heavily and placed light coverage on the other 2. A careful military might have covered all 3 corridors well. I paused because the pause was part of the explanation. We mined every corridor, every single possible approach route into this system from the outer belt all the way in. We did not leave gaps. We did not calculate minimum coverage. We asked one question: what is the maximum number of drifters we can produce, place, and maintain without our activity being detected? And then we produced that many, placed that many, and used every single one. Tal stared at me. How many ships have they lost already? He asked quietly. As if in answer, a signal came through on the tactical feed being piped to the dropship's internal screen. I looked up at it. The display showed the Council's advance formation, 47 ships in their wide arc. 11 of those markers were now dark. 11 ships gone, and our fleet had not yet fired a single weapon. Tal looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at me. His skin had gone to a color I had never seen on a Velthari before, a pale silver that I later learned was reserved for moments of profound recalibration. They flew into them, he said. They did not know they were there. 11 ships. In the first 4 minutes of their approach, before we engaged a single active weapon system, before a single human pilot pulled a trigger. I let that sit for a moment. This is what I mean when I say the fight was decided before it started. We did not wait for them to arrive and then react. We went out into the space between here and there, the space they would have to cross to reach us, and we turned it into a trap. We made the approach itself the weapon. The carver banked, and through the small viewport above Tal's head I could see the pale curve of Titan's surface below us, the orange and tan of its thick atmosphere rolling past. We were descending now. The ground phase was beginning. The Council's commanders are confused right now, I continued. They lost 11 ships to something they cannot explain. Their sensors told them the approach was clear. They trusted their sensors. They are now trying to recalibrate, re-examine their doctrine, figure out what they missed. And while they are doing that, they are also trying to maintain their formation, sustain their attack plan, and project confidence to their subordinate commanders. I stood up, because the bay doors were about to open. That is an enormous amount of pressure to put on a command structure. Confusion, losses, unanswered questions all at once. In the first 5 minutes of an engagement they expected to be simple. The bay doors opened. Titan spread out below us, massive and pale and waiting. So when they land on that surface, Tal said, rising beside me, they will already be shaken. They will already be shaken, I confirmed, and that is exactly where we want them. I stepped toward the edge of the bay and looked down at the surface of Titan, where the second phase of a plan years in the making was about to begin. Behind me, I heard Tal check his weapon with a crisp, practiced click. He was learning fast. Part 3, the second lesson, we don't break. My name is Amara Osai. I am an emergency field surgeon, and I have been elbow-deep in this war since hour 1, which means I have not slept in 31 hours, and I have consumed enough cold coffee to fuel a small orbital relay station. I am currently working out of Forward Operating Base Themis, which sits on the surface of Titan, which is Saturn's largest moon, and which humanity chose as a deliberate forward defensive position, because its thick atmosphere makes orbital bombardment unreliable, and its terrain, rolling plains broken by ridgelines and deep erosion channels, favors defenders who know it well over attackers who are seeing it for the first time. We have known this terrain for 4 years. We mapped every ridge, every channel, every flat section of ground where an armored unit can move at speed, and every narrow corridor where one cannot. Our engineers spent 8 months constructing FOB Themis, not just as a base, but as a series of interlocking defensive positions, each one designed to hold even if the one behind it fell. Right now, the outer defensive ring is holding. It has been holding for 3 hours. The soldiers holding it are tired and they are under real pressure, but they are holding. I know this because they keep coming to me with injuries, and then they keep going back. That is the part that I think about sometimes in the quiet seconds between procedures. Not the injuries themselves, which are my profession and my focus, but the going back. I patch a soldier's arm, check the seal, hand him his gear, and he stands up, rolls his shoulder once, and walks back toward the sound of the fight. There is no drama in it. No speech, no moment of visible decision-making. He just goes. I asked one of them about it once, a young soldier named Peter Wald, 22 years old, who came to me with a deep laceration across his left forearm that had bled significantly before the field medic got a temporary seal on it. While I was closing it properly, I asked him if he wanted a moment. He looked at me like I had asked him if he wanted to rearrange the furniture. "The line is right there," he said, nodding toward the outer wall. "I can hear it." That was the whole answer. The line was right there, and he could hear it, and therefore he needed to be at it. Nothing more complicated than that. I have treated soldiers from 3 other species in my career. I have treated Velthari. I have treated the stocky, methodical Granith who joined our coalition 6 months ago, and I have spent time in a joint medical facility where I worked beside healers from 2 border species who were watching this war with great personal interest. All of them have the same basic response to injury, which is to want the injury treated, and the same basic response to recovery, which is relief. The difference, as far as I have been able to observe it, is what happens after recovery. For most species, recovery means rest. The body was harmed, the body was repaired, the body needs time to return to its baseline before it is functional again. This is completely rational. This is how biology works. This is how a sensible creature treats itself. Humans treat recovery as a starting line. I have thought about this enough that I have formed a theory, though I am a surgeon and not a behavioral scientist, so take it for what it is worth. I believe it comes from our history. For most of human history, stopping was dangerous. If you stopped moving, something caught you. If you stopped working, you went hungry. If you stopped defending, you lost what you had built. The civilizations that survived were the ones where the people inside them developed the ability to operate past the point where stopping would have been the sensible choice. That trait got passed down, reinforced generation after generation, until it stopped being a choice and started being a reflex. The Council's ground forces landed on Titan 6 hours after their fleet entered our system. This was planned. We let them land. I know that sounds strange, but allowing an enemy force to land when you could theoretically contest the landing is a tactic with a very specific purpose. The Council's commanders expected resistance at the landing zones. They were prepared for a contested landing. They had their assault formations ready, their covering fire coordinated, their first wave objectives mapped. When they came down and found the landing zones clear, it created a problem inside their decision-making process, which is the same problem that arises any time a plan encounters reality, and reality does not match the plan. They had to pause, re-examine, decide whether the lack of resistance was an opportunity or a warning. It was a warning. We had channeled them. Every clear path led into a corridor that our engineers had designed, and at the end of every corridor were our people, our walls, and our weapons, waiting in positions that had been built, supplied, and reinforced over 4 months. The fight at Fob Themis had been going for 3 hours when the Council broadcast their psychological message. It came through on every open frequency, translated into human standard by their communication systems, and it said that resistance was futile, that humanity's casualties were unsustainable, that the Council offered a path to cessation of conflict through submission to protectorate terms, and that any human soldier who laid down their weapon would be treated with dignity. I was in the middle of a procedure when it came through the speaker in the medical bay. I did not stop what I was doing. Neither did my assistant, a medic named Claire Rowe, who has the steadiest hands I have ever worked beside. We finished the procedure in silence, and then I told Claire to prep the next station, and I went to wash my hands. The soldier on the table, a woman named Helen Marsh, late 30s, infantry veteran with 11 years of service, had heard the broadcast from the gurney. She had her eyes open, and she was staring at the ceiling with an expression that was very flat and very quiet. "Did you hear that?" she asked me. "I heard it," I said. She was quiet for another moment. "Protectorate terms," she said. The flatness in her voice was not anger. It was something older and cooler than anger. "They want to protect us." She sat up, checked the field seal on her side where I had just finished working, decided it was acceptable, and began putting her gear back on. "Helen," I said, "you should rest for." "How long until the next wave hits the outer wall?" she asked. I checked the tactical feed on my board. 17 minutes. She finished securing her gear and stood up. She looked at me once, and the expression on her face was not heroic or dramatic. It was simply settled. "I'll be back," she said, which in the context was both a practical statement and a small, dry piece of humor. She walked out. I turned back to my work. 2 hours after the broadcast, the Council's elite Krethen shock troops breached the outer wall of Fob Themis. The Krethen are considered, within Council military doctrine, to be the definitive answer to any planetary defensive problem. They are large, fast, exceptionally well-armored, and trained to generate panic in defending forces through the sheer overwhelming speed of their advance. The strategy works by making defenders feel that their position has been broken, that collapse is imminent, and that the rational choice is to fall back before becoming encircled. The Krethen came through the outer wall fast and hard, exactly as designed, and they found the inside of Fob Themis empty. Not empty of people, empty of the chaos they expected. No panic, no scrambling retreat, no collapse of command structure. Our forces had pulled back to the second wall, which they had built specifically to receive the Krethen advance, and they were waiting there in prepared positions with full ammunition loads and clear fields of fire. The Krethen commanders paused. The pause was only about 40 seconds long, but in a fast-moving breach operation, 40 seconds is a significant hesitation. They were reading a situation that did not match their doctrine. Their doctrine said that when the outer wall breaks, the enemy breaks with it. We had not broken, we had simply moved to the next wall. They pushed forward again and they hit the second wall, and the second wall held. Behind the second wall was a third, and behind that was a fourth, each one pre-built, pre-stocked, and pre-defended. The Krethen assault had been designed to generate a cascading collapse. Each successive line was supposed to fall faster than the last as morale degraded, and positions became untenable. Instead, each successive line held slightly longer than the one before it, because our soldiers were drawing the Krethen deeper into the structure of the base, channeling them through corridors that grew narrower and more controlled, pulling them further from their landing zone and their resupply lines. And then our armor, which had been sitting cold and quiet in a sealed bay on the eastern edge of the base for 16 hours, received its activation order. I felt it through the floor, the deep vibration of heavy tracked vehicles moving at speed. I heard the tactical radio crackle with short, clipped communications that I had learned to interpret. The armor had been released, it was flanking, and the Krethen forces were now between our infantry lines ahead of them and our armor behind them. The Council had sent their best soldiers into a building that was also a trap. Helen Marsh came back to me 40 minutes later. She had a minor concussion and a bruised shoulder, and she was in a moderately good mood. "Armor showed up," she said, sitting down on the gurney without being asked. "I felt it," I said. "You should have seen their faces." She paused, reconsidered, looked at the floor. Actually, no, you should not have seen their faces. She said it softly, and the good mood dimmed slightly, the way it always does when a soldier comes back to a quiet room and has a moment to think. They were just soldiers doing what they were told, same as us. I treated her concussion in silence. She did not go back after this one. She sat in the medical bay and drank water and stared at the wall, processing, the way soldiers do when the adrenaline finally finds its floor. Outside, the fight was turning. I could tell not from the radio or the feeds but from the sound, because the sound was moving away from us, pushing outward, and a fight moves away from you when you are winning and toward you when you are not. We were winning. Not because we were larger or faster or more powerful. We were winning because we had built a structure that was designed to receive the worst thing the Council could throw at it, absorb it, and turn it back. We had not tried to stop them at the outer wall. We had not tried to stop them at the second or the third. We had let them come in, and we had built the inside of this base to do exactly what it did. And when the hammer fell, our armor was there to close the door. Helen Marsh looked up at me at some point while I was writing notes. They thought we would fold, she said. Yes, I said. They do not understand what we built in here. No, I said, they do not. She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had been thinking about since before the Crethin came through the wall. We do not break, she said. We bend and we bend, and we keep bending all the way back to the spring we put there on purpose, and then we let go. I looked at her. 20 years in medicine, and sometimes a tired infantry soldier with a bruised shoulder says something that belongs in a book. That is exactly what we do, I said. Part 4, the third lesson, we remember. My name is Lena Vasquez. I am an ambassador, and I have spent the last 14 years representing humanity in conversations that the rest of the galaxy has never fully taken seriously, which is something I intend to fix today. I am currently sitting in a secure communications room aboard Relay Station Hermes, which orbits at the L4 point between Earth and the Moon, outside the immediate combat zone, but close enough that I can pull real-time tactical feeds and watch what is happening in the outer system. I have 3 screens open and a 4th that is currently dark, waiting for the Council's Supreme Archon to accept the connection request his own people sent to us 20 minutes ago. He sent it. I want you to understand that clearly, not our side, his. The battle has been running for 16 hours. In those 16 hours, the Council's fleet has lost 19 ships to our silent drifters, 6 more to our active defense platforms in the Middle Belt, and 3 in direct engagement with our fleet when our commanders judged the moment right to reveal our reserve formations from behind Jupiter's shadow. 28 ships destroyed or disabled out of an original 47. More than half their assault force gone. On the ground, the Crethin assault on Titan has been contained. Their forces are encircled. They are not suffering catastrophic losses, but they are not going anywhere, and their supply line to the landing zone has been cut by our infantry moving to seal the corridors behind them. The Crethin are very good soldiers in an open assault. In a siege where they are the ones surrounded, they are simply very good soldiers with nowhere to go. 3 of the Council's member species have already opened private communications with our State Department. I know this because my colleague Nora Blackwell, who handles back-channel diplomacy with more elegance than anyone I have ever worked with, pinged me 40 minutes ago with a message that said simply, 3 down, want company, which is Nora's way of saying she is handling 3 simultaneous defection conversations and is enjoying herself. The Council is fracturing. Not completely, not yet, but the cracks are visible to anyone who is watching. The 4th screen activated. The secure connection had been accepted. The face that appeared was not what I expected. Archon Velsharath, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Council's executive authority, was not the imposing figure I had seen in briefing photographs. He was older than his official images suggested, and there was something in the set of his features that I had seen many times in my career in many different life forms. He was a leader who had just watched his plan fail, and he was trying to decide whether the face he was showing me was the face of a negotiator or the face of someone who still believed he held the advantage. He did not hold the advantage, but he needed a moment to accept that, so I gave it to him. Ambassador Vasquez, he said. His translator rendered it in smooth, practiced human standard. I appreciate your willingness to speak directly. Of course, Archon, I said. I believe direct conversation is almost always more productive than the alternatives. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, a gesture that in council culture communicates measured authority, someone who is not rushing, someone who is in control of the pace of what follows. I recognized it from our intelligence briefings. What happened today, he said, represents a significant and regrettable miscalculation on the part of certain elements within the Council's military planning structure. I want you to know that the decision to initiate this action was not unanimous. There were voices, my voice among them, that counseled a more measured approach. I waited, he continued. Given the current situation, I believe it is in the interest of all parties to reach a ceasefire arrangement quickly, to minimize further loss of life on both sides. The Council would be prepared to restore humanity's pre-conflict status as a provisional protected species, with guaranteed trade access to 3 additional sectors and a formal seat at the Outer Council advisory table. These are significant concessions, Ambassador. I want you to understand that I am offering them in good faith. I let a short silence sit between us after he finished, not a long one, just enough. Archon, I said, I appreciate the offer, and I will respond to it honestly. But before I do that, I need to speak to you about something else. Something I believe is more important for both of us to understand before we discuss terms. He nodded carefully. He was not sure where this was going. On the 14th of March, 7 years ago, a human diplomatic envoy named Owen Price was traveling to the Outer Rim Council Summit aboard a civilian transit vessel registered to the Helen Shipping Collective. His vessel was intercepted by a strike team operating under Council military identification codes, and Owen Price did not survive that interception. The official Council position has always been that the vessel experienced a navigational malfunction. I kept my voice entirely calm. Our records include the original mission orders for that strike team, which we acquired through intelligence work I will not describe in detail. Those orders were signed by the head of Council Military Intelligence, who reports directly to the High Chamber. The Archon's expression had changed slightly. The careful composure was still there, but there was something underneath it now. I kept going. On the 2nd of July, 5 years ago, the Council's Trade Authority issued Directive 1194C, which reclassified 14 human commercial shipping routes as restricted corridors under the Council's Outer Jurisdiction Protocol. Our economists have calculated the direct trade loss to human colonies from that directive at approximately 340 billion standard units over the following 3 years. We have the full text of Directive 1194C, including the internal discussion document that preceded it, in which a senior Council trade official described the purpose of the directive as, and I am going to give you a direct translation here, reducing humanity's economic leverage before the next phase of containment. I paused. The Archon had gone very still. On the 19th of November, 4 years ago, a Council logistics contractor, operating under cover documentation, transferred financial resources to 3 pirate coordination groups operating in the Cashin Belt. Those groups subsequently conducted 11 raids on human colony supply vessels over the following 18 months. 47 crew members of those vessels were killed. We have the financial transfer records, the contract documents, and the communication logs between the contractor and the pirate coordination groups. I took a breath. I was not finished. I could continue for quite some time, Archon. I have records going back 9 years. Dates, names, coordinates, financial figures, communication transcripts, signed orders. We have been collecting all of this with great care for a long time because this is what we do. We record things. We keep them. We organize them carefully, and we do not lose them, and we do not forget them. Every slight, every action taken against our people, every decision made in closed rooms that was designed to weaken, contain, or harm humanity, we have a file for it. We have the documents. The Archon was quiet for 4 full seconds. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The measured authority was gone. What was underneath it was something simpler and more honest, which was a man who had just realized the full extent of what he was dealing with. "How," he said, "could you possibly have all of that?" "We are humans," I said. "We write everything down. Every meeting, every agreement, every betrayal, every broken promise. We have librarians and archivists and intelligence analysts whose entire professional purpose is to make sure that nothing is ever forgotten. We have institutions that exist specifically to receive information, protect it, organize it, and ensure that it is available to the people who need it when they need it. We have been doing this for thousands of years. Our history is full of moments where we failed to keep proper records and suffered for it, and we learned from every single one of those moments." I leaned forward slightly. "You came to us today looking for a ceasefire. You offered to restore us to provisional protected status. I need you to understand something about that offer, Archon. We were never provisional. We were never protected. We were a species you were managing, slowly and quietly, with the intention of absorbing or neutralizing us before we became powerful enough to resist. You had a timeline for that. We found the timeline." He said nothing. "So I am not going to accept your offer," I continued, "because your offer is designed to return us to the condition that made this attack possible in the first place, and I have far too much documentation of what that condition actually means for our people to agree to go back to it." I pulled up the document on my screen and turned it toward the camera. "What I am offering you instead is this: a full renegotiation of humanity's standing within the galactic community, conducted not through the Council's advisory table, but through a new framework with equal standing for all participating species. Binding accountability mechanisms for the incidents I described and the others in our records. An immediate end to all economic restrictions on human shipping and trade. Formal recognition of our coalition relationships with the border species who have chosen to work with us. And a permanent, verifiable commitment that actions like the one you attempted today will be subject to consequences defined by that new framework." I paused. "Those are our terms. They are not punitive. They are corrective. We are not interested in destroying the Council. We are interested in making the Council into something that actually functions the way it claims to function." The Archon looked at my document for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "You understand that what you are asking would require the agreement of every member species of the High Chamber," he said. "Yes," I said, "I do understand that. Some of them will refuse. Some of them are already in private conversations with my colleagues right now," I said. "3 of your member species have made contact in the last hour. I expect that number to increase as the day continues and the tactical situation on Titan becomes clearer." I kept my tone even. "Archon, the Council has functioned for 2 centuries by keeping peripheral species isolated, uninformed, and convinced that they have no viable alternative to Council authority. What you have done today, by attacking humanity directly, openly, and on record, is demonstrate to every single one of those species that Council authority is not as permanent as they were led to believe. That is not our doing. That is yours." He looked at the table in front of him for a long moment. "I will need time to consult," he said finally. "Of course," I said. "I will send you the full document within the hour." The connection went to standby. Not closed standby, which means he intended to continue the conversation. I sat back in my chair and looked at the tactical feeds for a moment. The numbers on the outer system engagement were still moving in our favor. The Titan encirclement was holding. The back-channel conversations Nora was running were progressing. My assistant, a young man named Dean Crawford who had been sitting quietly in the corner taking notes throughout the entire call, looked up from his tablet. "Did that go the way you expected?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "Better," I said. "He called us. That is always better." Dean nodded and went back to his notes. I opened the document I had shown the Archon and started reading through it one more time, because no matter how many times I had reviewed it, no matter how thoroughly I knew its contents, I believed in reading things again. I believed in knowing your material so completely that nothing can surprise you in the room. Nora's message came through as I was reading. It said, "5 down now, also one is asking to host the new Framework Summit. Suggest accepting, good optics." I wrote back, "Agreed, book it." Then I kept reading. Part 5, Dawn belongs to us now. I am Yale Doran, and it is 700 hours, 3 days after the 47 red markers appeared on my board and changed everything. I am standing at the main viewport of Luna Station, which is a long curved wall of reinforced observation glass that looks out over the surface of the moon, and beyond it into the depth of space. I have stood here hundreds of times during my 6 years on this station. I have watched meteor showers from here. I have watched supply convoys pass through. I have watched the distant stars that I used to think of as fixed and permanent before I understood that everything moves, that nothing holds still, that the universe is in constant motion and only appears static to those who are not looking carefully enough. Right now I am watching the last 3 Galactic Council warships execute their jump procedure at the edge of our system. They are leaving under a formal ceasefire flag, which means they are transmitting a specific signal that designates them as non-combatants in transition. Our fleet is letting them pass. We have confirmed their course, tracked their approach to jump range, and verified that they carry no personnel we are required to detain under the terms Ambassador Vasquez secured 18 hours ago. They are going. I watch until their jump signatures bloom and fade, that characteristic flash of blue-white light that occurs when a vessel enters faster than light travel, and then they are gone, and the space at the edge of our system is quiet again. Behind me, the operations floor of Luna Station is still busy. It will be busy for a long time. There are logistics to coordinate, damaged ships to assess, supply chains to restore, communication records to compile and archive, medical reports to process, structural repairs to plan. War does not end cleanly. It leaves a list of tasks behind it that takes months to work through. And the people who do that work are as essential as the ones who fought, even if their names end up in reports rather than records. I turn from the viewport and look at the room. Owen Carlyle is at his station, still working, running diagnostics on the outer sensor network. He has been here for 3 days with only brief rest intervals, and he looks tired in a way that sleep will fix, which is the best kind of tired. When this is over, I'm going to make sure he takes 2 full weeks of leave, and I'm going to make sure it is written in the orders so he cannot argue with it. He was 24 years old when this started, and he did not shake once after the first 5 minutes. There is a large display on the wall to my right that shows an updated map of the solar system, with all known council positions, fleet signatures, and approach corridors marked. Most of those markers are now labeled inactive, withdrawn, or cleared. The map is almost clean. It is beautiful in a way that only makes sense if you have spent 3 days watching it fill up with threat indicators. I walk back to my station and pull up the full report that has been compiling since the engagement began. 63 hours of continuous combat operations across 4 theaters: outer belt, orbital approaches, Titan surface, and the diplomatic channel that Ambassador Vasquez has been running with a precision that I have the deepest professional respect for. The numbers are in the report, and I will read them carefully, as I read everything carefully, but right now I am more interested in the pattern than the figures. The pattern is this: we knew they were coming. We prepared for what was coming. We held when they arrived. We did not break, not at any point, not in any theater. And when it was over, we were in a stronger position than when it started, not just militarily but structurally, in terms of how this species stands in the wider community of this galaxy. That is not an accident. I have seen a lot of after-action analysis in my career, and the analysis will come, and it will be thorough and important, and it will tell us what we did right and what we could improve. But before the analysis begins, I want to sit with the pattern for a moment, because the pattern is the thing that matters most. We are a species that does not believe in being caught off guard. I have thought about this a great deal over the past 3 days, not just tactically but historically. Humanity's relationship with danger is not a simple one. We are not fearless. We do not pretend that threats are not real. We are, in fact, almost constitutionally unable to stop thinking about threats, which is something that the rest of the galaxy seems to find either impressive or unsettling depending on which species you ask. We build redundancies. We prepare contingencies. We run drills for situations we consider unlikely, and then run additional drills for situations we consider impossible. We take the impossible seriously because our history is full of times when the impossible happened, and the only people who survived it were the ones who had, on some level, prepared for it anyway. The Galactic Council spent 9 years studying humanity before they moved against us. They read our literature, our history, our philosophical texts, our scientific output. They had analysts, presumably good ones, whose job was to understand us well enough to defeat us. And still, they made the same mistake that everyone makes when they study us from the outside. They saw the preparation, and they read it as fear. They thought that our walls and our stockpiles and our drills and our intelligence networks were the behavior of a species that was frightened. And fear, in their doctrine, meant vulnerability. A frightened species builds walls because it knows it cannot fight. A frightened species stockpiles because it knows it cannot sustain losses. A frightened species runs drills because it does not trust its own people to perform under pressure. They did not understand that our preparation is not fear. It is the opposite of fear. It is the thing that allows us to stand at a viewport watching the last enemy ships leave our system without our hands shaking, because we did not spend those 3 years building our defenses in a state of panic. We built them in a state of absolute, clear-eyed focus. We built them because we respected the threat enough to take it seriously, and we took it seriously because that is the only way to do anything. There is a difference between fear and attention. We pay attention. The comm channel opened with a soft chime. It was Ambassador Vasquez calling from Relay Station Hermes. "Yale," she said. She sounded tired but clear, the way she always sounds, which is to say fully present. The Archon confirmed the Framework Summit location 30 minutes ago. It will be hosted by the Velthari Confederation on their primary diplomatic station in the Outer Rim. Nora is already coordinating the logistics. The Velthari, I said. I thought about that for a moment. A species the Council had been slowly strangling economically for 60 years, now hosting the summit that would rewrite the terms of how this galaxy operates. That is good. I thought you would like that. A brief pause. Our casualty reports are finalized. I wanted you to see them before they go to the public record. She sent the file. I opened it and read through it carefully, all of it, every name and every detail, because this is what I believe in. Not summaries, not totals. The actual record. When people are lost, the least I can do is know their names. I sat with the file for a long time. The losses were smaller than any reasonable projection for a conflict of this scale had predicted, and I want to be clear that this is not comfort. Small is not none. Every name in that file is a person who prepared and served and held their position and did not come back, and the fact that our preparation reduced the number does not change the weight of any individual name within it. I saved the file. I will read it again tonight, and the night after that, and at every formal commemoration that follows. When I looked up from the file, I noticed Owen had turned in his chair. He was looking at me with the quiet, slightly uncertain expression of someone who has a question, but is not sure of the timing. "Ask," I said. "Do you think they will try again?" he said. "The council." I thought about this honestly, the way I try to think about all real questions. The council as it currently exists will not survive the Framework Summit in its current form, I said. Vasquez has enough member species committed to the new structure that the High Chamber's authority is going to be fundamentally redistributed. So the specific organization that attacked us 3 days ago, in its current configuration, probably will not try again, because it probably will not exist in its current configuration. Owen processed that, and something else. Something else someday, probably. This galaxy is full of old powers and new ones, and old powers do not give up their positions without cycling through several rounds of testing the resolve of whoever is challenging them. I looked back at the viewport, at the now clean space at the edge of our system. The question is never whether someone will try. The question is whether we are ready when they do. Owen was quiet for a moment. And will we be? I thought about the silent drifters. Right now, while we were having this conversation, while the ceasefire flags were still visible on our tracking systems, and the diplomatic documents were still being finalized, and the last council ships were only hours past their jump point, unmanned drone units were already back at work in the approach corridors of our solar system. They were moving quietly, dark, no broadcast signal, no electronic signature. They were placing new drifters in new positions, calibrated against updated models of how an enemy fleet, having seen our previous placement patterns, might try to approach differently next time. We had already updated the models. We had already begun placing the new drifters. We had not waited to be asked, and we had not waited to see what the diplomatic outcome would be, because our defensive posture and our diplomatic posture operate independently and in parallel and have always done so, and always will. Owen did not know this yet. He would learn it, because he was going to be an excellent officer, and this was the kind of thing excellent officers learn. "We will be ready," I said. "We are already getting ready." He nodded slowly, and I could see something settling in him, not false confidence, not the aggressive kind of certainty that collapses under pressure, but the quiet, grounded kind that comes from understanding the work. He was understanding it now. He was learning that readiness is not a state you achieve and then rest inside. It is a practice. It is a continuous, daily, disciplined practice that you maintain not because you are afraid of what is coming, but because you respect the possibility of it. I turned back to the viewport one more time. The space out there was dark and immense and full of things we did not yet know about, species we had not yet met, threats we had not yet mapped, distances we had not yet crossed. The galaxy was not finished showing us what it contained. We had won this engagement, and that was significant, and I was proud of every person who had been part of it. But the galaxy was old and complicated, and it was not going to simplify itself because we had a good 3 days. There would be more days. There would be harder questions. There would be moments that our current preparation had not accounted for because there are always such moments, and the appropriate response to that reality is not anxiety but diligence. Keep mapping. Keep updating the models. Keep seeding the corridors. Keep reading the files carefully, every name, every date, every detail. Keep watching the board. From somewhere in the broader galaxy, through channels Nora Blackwell was quietly monitoring, transmissions were beginning to come in from species that had not been party to any of the communications of the past 3 days. Small species, marginal ones, the kind that the Council had always categorized as inconsequential and therefore largely ignored. They were broadcasting on open frequencies, in their own languages, some of them languages we had only partial translations for, and the content of those broadcasts varied in detail but shared a common direction. If humanity could do it, perhaps resistance was possible. If one species could stand up and hold, perhaps others could stand beside them. If the Council was not the permanent, immovable ceiling of this galaxy's political structure, perhaps the ceiling could be raised. Grace Hollies, the analyst who had broken the Council's cipher 3 years ago and who was now running our signals intelligence team from a station in the inner belt, sent me a message that contained no text, only a compilation file of those transmissions. The file was large. It contained several hundred separate broadcasts from dozens of systems, still coming in, the number growing as the hours passed. I opened the file and scrolled through it slowly, reading the summaries, listening to the fragments our translators had processed. All those voices from all those distant places, speaking into open space, not to us specifically but toward the direction where we were, saying in their own ways that something had changed. Something had changed. I sat back in my chair, at the board that had been my responsibility for 6 years, on the station that orbited the planet I came from, and I thought about what the Council's analysts had written in that document we decoded 3 years ago. They had described humanity as a species in the process of becoming something worth taking seriously. They had used that as a justification for moving against us before we grew too strong. They had misread the timeline. We had not been becoming something worth taking seriously. We had been, for a very long time, exactly that thing, waiting for the moment when the rest of the galaxy caught up to that fact. We had been patient, because we understood that patience is not passivity. Patience is the discipline of waiting for the right moment while continuing to prepare for it. They attacked at dawn because they believed darkness was our weakness. They did not know that we invented the watch. They did not know that we have always kept a rotation of people awake through the dark hours, not out of fear, but out of the deep-seated conviction that the hours when everyone else sleeps are the hours when the prepared gain their advantage. We were awake long before they came. We will be awake long after they are gone. Outside the viewport, the solar system held its slow, enormous rotation, Jupiter swinging in its wide arc, Saturn's rings catching the light at their distant angle, the moon's pale surface stretching below me, and beyond all of it, the stars, fixed in their apparent stillness, actually moving, always moving, the whole of it turning in ways that required patience and attention to perceive. I reached over to my console and added a new entry to the daily log. Date, time, status of all defensive sectors, summary of diplomatic developments, current posture of the Silent Drifter program, personnel notes, casualty file reference number, signals intelligence file reference number. All of it recorded, organized, and stored in a system that would keep it for as long as humanity kept records, which, based on our history, would be for a very long time. I closed the log entry. Then I opened a new monitoring window, checked the sensor feeds at the outer belt, confirmed that the drone teams were operating on schedule, looked at the updated drifter placement projections for the next 30 days, cross-referenced them against the new approach corridor models Grace's team had generated, and noted 2 areas where additional coverage would be beneficial. I flagged them for the logistics team with a priority notation. Then I sat back, and I watched the board and I waited. That is what we do. We are always waiting.